What makes a game fun, as opposed to boring or anxiety-inducingly hard? This is a question that many game designers often ask themselves for the obvious reason that they want to make a fun game. The answer, I find, is ensuring the player falls into a state of flow. A state of focus and immersion where the game's mechanics fall out in front of the player at the same pace that the player's brain works. So what exactly is flow? Flow is a state where a player becomes completely immersed in the game world and gameplay. Their mind is no longer interacting with the keyboard and monitor, but may as well be inside the game, completing its actions, no track of time, no external thoughts. The game runs at the same pace as the player's brain, with the player being rewarded for their positive actions both visually and audibly. This can be in many contexts, such as a platformer where the act of jumping, dashing and swinging between obstacles and platforms happens with good pacing in a way that feels technical and difficult, but not distressing in its difficulty or achievability. Or in a puzzle game where the answer unfolds in the player's brain at a pace neither too fast to make it feel easy, nor too slow to make it boring or frustrating. In order to maintain the player's flow experience, the activity needs to reach a balance between the challenge of the activity and the abilities of the participant, with consistent visual and audible rewards. So if flow is so important in providing a satisfying gaming experience, how exactly can you achieve it in your games, and why is Ori and the Will of the Wisps such a great example of getting players to experience it? Well, in order to achieve flow in Ori, I noticed 4 main characteristics. The first being a challenging activity that requires skills, such as precise or pixel-perfect platforming and combat. The platforming and combat of Ori is something that often has multiple different approaches, all with quick and precise button presses, often with less than 1 second between dashes and bashes. Often in dynamic situations where the projectiles and enemies which are used to move are all somewhat unpredictable in their movement. The second thing is clear goals. This one is fairly obvious, but the game almost always has clear goals related either to its story or to player upgrades the player can earn by completing challenges or purchasing from NPCs. As well as this, more short-term goals must be clear, such as defeating a particular enemy, overcoming some obstacles, or completing a piece of a puzzle. These goals should become clear to the player at the same rate the player experiences the game and is able to process them. For example, at this point my goal is escaping these enemies and trying to get a bit higher, and then as soon as I've done that, the goal suddenly switches to being getting across to that ledge over there. This sort of goal switching happens at the exact same pace that my brain is working. My brain was looking for a new goal as soon as I finished the last one, and the game presented that to me immediately. The third thing that happens is you're always getting direct feedback from the game. This is one of the more important things. The player is constantly rewarded for their actions through particle effects, sounds, as well as gameplay rewards like boosts of momentum and launches high into the air. As well as rewarding the player for their positive actions, the game also gives tactile-like feedback for mistakes, such as losses of momentum and negative sound effects. Micro-rewarding and punishing the player with constant and direct feedback is an incredibly important part for ensuring the player is in a flowing state within the game. Great examples of this in Ori are the particle effects, screen shake, and the many sound effects, all feeding back to the player as to whether they are making progress or not. The fourth and final quality that I noticed was the sense of control. It's a commonly spoken rule in game development that you must never try to take control away from the player, and doing so will often feel odd and immersion breaking. In order to maintain a state of flow, this should of course be obeyed. The player must always feel in control, even if they aren't really. We can see great examples of this in Ori with the sand dashing feature in the desert section of Ori. The feature will let the player dash through a blob of sand, launching them out the other side with a large amount of momentum. As the player, you will often do this, dashing perfectly into the sand and out the other side in just the right direction. Either unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the game actually does a lot of the work for you, making sure you are aimed perfectly at the blob and go through at just the right angle so you can make the next jump. However, it quite literally is the thought that counts. So long as the player feels like they have been in control and achieved these things, the state of flow will continue. So to wrap up, games that are fun almost always achieve a state of flow with the player. Similar to being in the zone, flow is a state of immersion and focus where the game is laid out at the same pace that the player's brain is thinking. Games that achieve this seem to almost always have the following properties. The game will have a perfect mix of challenge and require a level of skill without being distressing. The game must then reward the player for their skill with clear goals as well as direct feedback, both visually and audibly, all while ensuring the player feels in control, that their accomplishments are their own. I believe Ori and the Will of the Wisps, especially its amazing platforming and combat, achieves this brilliantly, harnessing all 4 of these rules, which, if I'm honest, I did make up based on Ori, making for gameplay that leaves the player in a flow-like state that I described earlier, with satisfying and fun gameplay. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed that, then of course go ahead and like and subscribe, it would really mean a lot to me. I've got more devlogs on the way, as well as some other videos similar to this with more essay focused on game design.